This month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. If anything just feels a little uncomfortable or you need a break to have some tea or water, please do so.
Today we're talking about family violence, and we're coming from Connect, which is an organization that works with communities and families to build safe relationships. Family violence is a type of interpersonal violence, and this is how we define interpersonal violence. It's the actual or threatened, and then a lot of these different kinds of abuse: physical, sexual, psychological, could be verbal, emotional, or spiritual, and economic or financial abuse that impacts the abused person's ability to function in a self-determining and healthy way. Self-determining is being able to make your own decisions and choices without someone controlling that. So really, interpersonal violence is a pattern in which the abusive person tries to establish power and control. We always want to remember behind interpersonal violence is just this pattern of someone trying to establish and maintain, by whatever means possible, power and control over another person.
There's so many different subcategories, but these are the things that we see most often and are most common. And I think also to add to this is that we don't talk about how it creates so much fear. Fear in the family, fear of the person. I think fear sometimes is minimized because it gets dismissed by people when you share, oh, I'm afraid of this. But people in the family can become very scared and fearful when someone is doing these things, or more than one person is doing these things in the home.
This is just a visual of power and control and these different types of abuse. Here I just listed out some different types of interpersonal abuse because family violence is one type, but this type of violence can occur in many different situations, such as with an intimate partner or within workplace. There's teen dating abuse, technology abuse. These are just different kinds of interpersonal violence. And today we're going to be focusing on family violence. So I had a video.
Tosh! Tasha, what are you doing? You know we're gonna be late, right? You do know my sister's on her way to pick up baby, right?
Yeah, I know. I just got home too. I'm trying to get baby's bag ready.
Is that why the house is a mess?
Yeah, nice to see you too, babe.
So I come home from work, house is a mess, my son's not even ready, and I got attitude from you,
What?
and now you want to dress like that.
Like what?
Like that. Like a skank. You think your son wants a skank for him, Mum?
You think he wants an abusive father?
What did you say? You're not talking to one of your patients now, Tasha. You dress nasty, I'll call you nasty. You want people to see you with all your bits hanging out? Hey, yay. I'm talking to you. Well, do you? I come home to a messy house. You can't even look after our son. And now you want to dress all skanky so we can go out so you can just flirt with your workmates? Do you like making me angry? Well, is that what you want? David! Tell me, because I get sick and tired of this! David! Tell me! Because I can play this game long as
what are you doing?
David!
Really? Really, David?
She's got a smart mouth. You got a smart mouth!
You're just like Dad, David. Do you really want Chris to grow up and live like this? And now you want to hit me?
I've never hit you.
And you'd hit your wife in front of your kid.
She deserves it! You see that?
one deserves to be touched like that. It's like you're saying it's right for someone to come and hit me. Is that what you're saying, David? Bro, we said we would never be like that. But you are. What's worse is Chris is gonna see everything just like we did. I love you, bro. But you need to get help now. You're my responsibility. Tasha and baby are yours. David.
Okay. I don't want to be like that. Just get like so angry. Go get help. I promise.
Really shows the cycle of family violence and also just how there was his spouse involved, but also his sister, his son. So violence can affect many different people at one time in a family.
I don't think that there's as many conversations about intergenerational trauma and intergenerational violence. When we see the video in the beginning, we're just noticing that it's this couple. But when the sister arrives, we notice or we hear from their interaction that they had gone through a similar scenario and it really impacted them. It just seemed as though the sister needed to remind him that even though she loved him and she's his sister, this was not okay. Even if they went through it as children, it is still not okay. Sometimes we'll see that when the family becomes involved, and sometimes the interaction is positive, like this one, he stopped and he was thinking. Sometimes the interaction is not so positive, and that person may not respond to their siblings or a sister or anyone else. But these clearly things that happen every day, and having to stand up to a family member does take a lot of courage. And also thinking about what is he going to do next? We know that trauma can be intergenerational passed, but we also know that healing can also be passed on. If we were to have a best case scenario and he does listen, perhaps he can begin his healing journey. Whether he stays, the healing still needs to happen with that person.
Even if he gets help, she's still allowed to leave. Stressful with trust long term. I think that's an important point, that she still absolutely has her agency in this, whether he is getting help or not.
Within the video, we definitely saw many different tactics of abuse, but these are just tactics that are used to establish and maintain power and control. And a lot of these exist simultaneously. There are even more types than just listed here, but these are the ones we'll touch on today.
And what's important is that even if one of these things is happening, it's still abuse. It doesn't have to just be physical abuse. Always keep that in mind, because sometimes people get caught up in the physical abuse as the only real abuse, but abuse is real when one thing of this list happens, right? And it's a pattern of it. I don't want people to feel like their experience is less than somebody else's experience because they didn't go through physical abuse.
So first we have verbal tactic. That's using words or body language as a tactic of power and control. So we definitely saw that in the video and just what he was saying to her, as we see here, like yelling and screaming, cursing at someone. I think he definitely also used his body language to intimidate her. And I would even say maybe he used the look which is the look that is between an abuser and a survivor that signals like, you know what's coming, basically. Another one that's not commonly thought of here is the silent treatment. This can be used to get power and control and just completely cutting off communication.
One thing that we can say in the video, his sister was an ally to the survivor, right? And as soon as she saw what was happening, she could actually hear the yelling and the screaming. She knew that there was something wrong. In certain situations, you may have an abusive person's family join in the abuse. Think about it in different kind of ways in which how this can happen.
Just on the self-esteem or your concept of how you feel about yourself can really be chipped away at with verbal abuse for sure. Then sort of in the same line is emotional and psychological abuse. So this is using intimidation, manipulation, and or harassment. And these are some examples of that. So first, clearly an example of family violence is using children as weapons. So false reports of child abuse, threatening to take custody, just using the children to get power and control over the partner. Preventing a victim or survivor from practicing their faith is a type of spiritual abuse. Again, is just maintaining that power and control, not allowing a survivor to make a decision of their own choice of what kind of faith they want to practice. Constant vigilance and stalking. This is easily facilitated with technology now, having someone show up in places or have to know where you are at all times. Then we have cheating and infidelity. That sort of goes in line with lying and sort of tricking someone and they're not having full knowledge of the situation. So that removes power from them.
A whole family can be involved in either the healing or be part of the abuse. One thing that I see a lot is the children being used in families to abuse the survivor by the extended family. I've seen situations where the dad will begin to start using words like you're ugly or you're fat or you're whatever to mom, and then encourage the children to say those things to mom. If they're living in a home where there's an extended family living there too, they may encourage the in-laws or the brothers or the sisters, other people to join in this kind of verbal abuse. When we think about family, there's a lot of power in family. So it could be for a positive, healthy power, but it could also be for the opposite in terms of abuse.
The children grow up seeing this behavior and having it normalized or even sort of encouraged. That is just another example of the intergenerational trauma. One of the things that happens with abuse is that it creeps up on people. A lot of us in the sort of abstract will say, I couldn't, I wouldn't tolerate that.
I think one thing that people have named that sort of allows abuse to creep up is love bombing. So that's when in the beginning of a relationship, someone is over the top, giving you all these gifts, these elaborate speeches of love, and then it's slowly taken away as you become more committed to the person. And then abuse can easily sneak in from there. So I think it can start in really subtle ways that can be hard to pick up on. And then before you know it, you're in this situation.
To piggyback on that, most relationships start off well or generally okay because an abuser wants to make sure that they are in. So if in the beginning they show all their true colors, then people aren't normally going to move in with them or stay with them. So they like to build trust in the beginning. Then what may also happen is if someone is saying, stop, no, I don't want to be in this relationship, this is not healthy, let's break up. You cannot just break up with an abuser like you would break up in a situation that's healthy. Abusers do not allow for a healthy breakup because they want power and control. And so it could be very dangerous to break up. As a matter of fact, most people are at risk when they are not with that person anymore because the abuser wants so much power and control that they're willing to go the extra mile of harm. And that could also be taking that person's life. And statistically speaking, most people really experience the most physical or most damning harm when they leave, which may also include losing their lives at the hands of this person. It is not just a simple, I'm not allowing this. Nobody allows this. This is not something that people want to live with, but the difficulty and the obstacles of getting out are real and very dangerous.
People can have financial difficulties that make it difficult to leave. Sometimes you don't even know that something is abuse until later, until you get to a situation where you can actually see it from the outside and you have the language and the resources to say, oh, I realized that was abuse, which I think is a really good point too. It isn't necessarily something you can identify when you're in it or that you have the language for it, especially if it isn't physical, because that's what people think about. Not having a safe place to go can be an obstacle for people, especially if they don't have family in the country.
This is not a simple decision, especially if you have children, because you not only need a place for yourself, but you need a place for your children.
And that can also happen with pets also, because not all
Yep.
shelters allow you to bring your pets. So now we'll move on to sexual tactics of abuse. So this is sexual coercion, which is like force, aggression, and reproductive coercion. Anytime when consent is not present in a sexual encounter would be considered sexual abuse. So obviously rape, sexual assault, sexual coercion, guilt trips, guilting, that can also happen sexually and make it very difficult to say no in that situation. Reproductive coercion could look like birth control sabotage. This could be like poking holes in a condom to force someone to get pregnant without their knowledge, or force sex with no condom. Then the other side could be forced abortions or pregnancy, forced to, or coerced to have sex with others. That would be sexual abuse, and then infidelity as well.
One thing I tell people is that this area of abuse is very hard for people to sit with and hard for people to talk about, because there might be a lot of shame and embarrassment, especially because this is something that is happening to you by someone you were either with or still with. And we had always been conditioned as a society to believe in the stranger harm, like the stranger danger, and no one really had conversations as we were growing up about how you can also be harmed sexually by someone you are with. That can feel confusing and also embarrassing, because this is the person you either have children with or used to be with. In any case, no one is just out there speaking about their intimate life just like nothing. It has a feeling and an emotion. And when you're being forced to have children or forced to have abortions, wherever you stand on that, the line to underline is just forced. This is not on your own decision making. It's not your own agency. And that is scary now when we're looking at what's happening in our country and in our world. And if there's a possibility that abortion becomes a national ban, domestic violence and intimate partner violence, family violence is going to increase because of this. So you have to also think about how challenging this is, because we're also talking about bringing a child to the world in a situation that we already know is abusive and unhealthy. So people need to be in a situation where they trust you and feel connected to you to even say a little bit about this.
I think it becomes even more difficult sometimes when it's family members doing the sexual abuse on another family member. And that is, I feel, a lot more common than we think it is. But in terms of just immediate family, extended family, it can be really hard to talk about, because a lot of times family members will defend the abuser or just look away and pretend it's not happening.
And if you're thinking about this intergenerationally, this may have happened to the parents, to the grandparents. There may be also one uncle or one grandpa or grandma or auntie or someone that this has happened to, and then the expectation is, or just the way it's not dealt with in terms of the trauma, is making believe it's just not there.
Financial and economic tactics. So this is when someone's trying to control or have power over someone else's finances or joint finances. These are just some examples examples. One that some people wouldn't commonly think of is education or employment prevention and sabotage. This could be preventing someone from going to school or work, or if they're at school or work, calling their place of employment, saying negative things about the person, and sabotaging their ability to maintain a job.
When you cannot move because you don't even have a savings in the bank or your credit is damaged, it's the real hardcore reality that I can't even rent an apartment if my credit is poor, or I don't have the 1 month's rent to move. And all of that really is concrete. Like, it's not in the air, it's not what I think or what I feel, it's concrete. So when it's concrete, I feel more stuck because where am I gonna go? How am I gonna do this? I might as well just stay here. We know that it's hard to get an apartment in New York City just by itself.
Under the best of circumstances.
Yeah, we have to just have some compassion and some empathy when we look at the emotional, psychological, verbal, sexual, and financial. You know, all of these things could be happening. And if you're in a family where there is no individual savings, like there's one pot and everybody in the family saves their money in one place, you cannot save your own money to leave. That can happen.
So lastly, we have physical tactics, which sometimes is what people commonly think of with abuse, but in reality, most of the abuse that occurs is what we have already discussed. These are some examples of physical violence beyond just hitting someone. So this could be controlling someone's physical body by forcing them to gain or lose weight. Again, this could happen between partners, but it could also happen from parent to child, controlling just certain parts of their physical self. We also have branding a survivor, and a form of branding that some people might not be aware of is giving someone hickeys, because that's leaving a mark and saying, this is mine. Not all the time, but in some circumstances.
Right now, when we think about power and control and we think about someone's day-to-day living, like intimate partner violence and family violence is a full experience. So if you wake up in the morning and you cannot choose what you're eating, what you're wearing, when you're going to sleep, when you're doing housework, if you get to watch television or do whatever you want, go on your phone, when nothing is yours, because that's not allowed, you are really living in not only a very oppressed, suffocated kind of state. You're terrified if you step out of that, what could happen to you? Because if it's so extreme on how you're living. So let's say I've married into a family, or the family that I have now is one in which I'm being forced to not be myself, just plain and simple, not be myself and how I want to walk in the world. It really does a lot to that person's spirit as well, not just their physical appearance, but how they feel about themselves inside. And it does weigh on someone where they're feeling hopeless and helpless and not sure if there's even hope for them. I think we are in a society or in a world where we blame the survivor instead of holding the whoever's doing the abuse accountable. And if it's an entire family against one, how fair is that? This is really unfair and really just wrong to blame the survivor. And the survivor could be anybody. We don't have a face of a survivor. People make assumptions that you're weak or you are not smart or you just like it. All of these false assumptions. But when there is a group, and not just your partner, just a group against you, you really feel hopeless and helpless. And so these things can happen on a regular basis. You have the force and weight of a whole family kind of tying you down. And it's hard with one. It's even harder with a lot of other people.
I think it's important to acknowledge that this happens in all communities, but it can look specific ways in specific ones.
I think the visual in terms of how the norms are set, like what is supposed to be the roles of people, whoever these people are. The snapshot may be different from community to community, but the power and control is the same. So what's underlying always is the thread throughout various communities or all communities, but the snapshot, what does the nuance of it, how does it look in terms of the community looking the other way, can be very different from one, whether it's faith-based, whether it's secular, whether it's based on a particular group of people coming from one country. Even just our own thought of gender roles is very binary and specific in our world. Men, women, anything in between causes people to feel like there's something wrong. We know that it can happen in all these places and spaces and may just look different, but it's at the core the same.
So one last thing that we wanted to touch on as a form of family violence is neglect. That's when a family member who has the duty to care for you fails to provide you with your basic needs. So this could be onto children. It could also be onto older people who have a younger family member taking care of them. These are just some more specific examples of things that might be not being provided, like food, warm clothing, healthcare, medication, personal hygiene. Lastly, we just wanted to name how we can support survivors, since we know this is extremely common and there are survivors among us and just in our day-to-day lives. So we always want to listen and believe survivors. A big barrier to coming forward is that survivors are often not believed or listened to. I think it's important to check in with the survivor, so don't let the one time they tell you be the only time it's discussed. Checking in shows that you care, and sometimes people need multiple conversations to feel safe to open up about something. Then we can offer help with safety planning. Trying to leave an abusive relationship is a really dangerous time, so having people supporting you and making a plan for how to execute that can be helpful. And then reminding survivors it's not their fault and they don't deserve this, because a lot of times they're getting the opposite messages from the abusive partner or just from how society frames abuse sometimes. So these are just some ways we can support each other. If there are further questions or comments, you need resources, this is the contact information.
We kind of reflect society in a lot of ways, and where things are going politically also reflects in our communities. So we are seeing that if we want to just talk about straight up physical crime, just crime, domestic violence as a crime is always increasing. It never goes down. And those are the things that are criminal, arrestable offenses. There's so much abuse that's not criminal or that's not arrestable, but for the ones that are criminal or law breaking, it's always going up. That means that there's so much more abuse happening than what we even hear that's reported. Domestic violence is always underreported. Family violence is always underreported. People don't want to call police on family, and I understand that. Regardless of a cultural practice, this is what I would say. Anything that someone feels harm or afraid or doesn't want to do, we need to respect their agency, period. Regardless if this was something that was done to all the women in their family. If we have free will and choice to say no, that needs to be respected. And we will support someone in that journey. And it is not to vilify anyone's ethnic group or cultural practice, but it is for the protection and support of this individual. One thing I want to plug is that we have dialogues and circles happening. There's a monthly women's circle, and it's anybody.
I'm going to be starting a queer LGBTQ circle for LGBTQ individuals who want to have a space to talk about intimate partner violence, healthy relationships, and just self-care in general.